So I'm Rana Jawad, convener of the MENA Social Policy Network. I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to this November edition of our monthly webinar series, and really pleased to introduce our authors, rather our presenters, who have also authored a report, and thank you to them for making time to share their findings, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. So as you can see, there's a major new report that our colleagues would like to present to us, called World Development Challenges Report, and very pleased to introduce the presenters, and I'm sure many names will be familiar amongst our audience. So Khalid Abu-Ismail, Youssef Chaitani, Abdulkarim Jaafar, and Maria Hitti. I hope I've said that right, who will be sharing with us findings for the Arab countries from this report, and considering specific aspects related to conflict development, as well. So we've got about 40 minutes for colleagues to present, and also for a Q&A. Just as a general summary, the World Development Challenges Report makes the case for re-examining development progress through a broader analytical lens. It proposes a Development Challenges Index, DCI, that is well suited to evaluating and addressing the complex challenges facing the Arab region, as well as other regions worldwide. So we look forward to hearing more from our colleagues, and just to properly introduce their roles. So Abdulkarim Jaafar is an economic researcher and co-author of the report based at the ESCWA. Maria Hitti is also an economic researcher and a co-author based at the same organization. Youssef Chaitani is Chief of Section on Conflict Prevention and Risk Management, and Khalid Abu-Ismail is the Senior Economist and the Poverty and Human Development Group, also both at the ESCWA. So welcome everyone. I shall now hand over to our speakers, please, and we look forward to listening to you. Thank you all. And I'll chair the best way that I can. We'll try to keep the time so we leave for the Q&A. So I may raise my hand or interrupt you, but it's just so that we can make time for good discussion. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rona. Thank you, Ed, for hosting us once again. Very much looking forward to presenting this report, which is, I think, the first presentation that alludes to the Arab region. Hopefully, many more to come. And yes, please do. If we can't see you because I've minimized to get maximum screen. So if you want to just come in with your voice, then that would be great. So let me go straight to the presentation, and I'm going to start with a few introductory remarks about the report. Go through the main findings, a little bit of focus on the policies, and then also going beyond the report and contextualizing it within our current and future research agenda. I think that's where we also would like to hear some feedback. And then Youssef is going to talk to us about the conflict and the megatrends and how all of this fits in also with the current work that he's leading, before I close with some final remarks. So the first question that I think is relevant is, why is the Regional Commission doing a report on world development challenges? And I think the easiest and quickest answer for this is because when we come to write a story about the Arab region, and we look at the tools, the global tools, and that are available, the global indices, be it, the GNI per capita, the poverty, $2 a day, or the HDI or the MPI, the global MPI, these are really quite limited and don't take into account a lot of, first of all, what we've seen in this particular region, and also what we've seen throughout the world and since the 90s, and especially when it comes to the human development concept, which this report is anchored to, I should say, the capability approach, the whole human development literature. This is really the intellectual anchor that we are focusing on. in terms of developing our narrative. But that's as any conceptual framework, it's much richer than any single index can capture. So the idea here is to develop an intellectual case for and present a framework that can not just suit the Arab region, but really is relevant for all developing and developed countries, as we will argue. So that when we develop this, we can then go back and tell the story, as we will with the Arab forthcoming Arab Development Challenges report, but armed with this better analytical framework. And of course, it is our mandate as a regional commission to contribute to the ongoing global dialogue on rethinking development measures. And we are actually part of that global dialogue on thinking of development progress beyond GDP. So this is also part of what we do. It's been a long process getting this report. We've had a core team, 3 people, Maria, Abdulkarim, myself, 2 global advisors, senior global advisors, Salim Jihan, former director of Human Development Report Office, Terry McGinley of SOAS, 9 contributing authors, and 13 senior global reviewers. We've had 10 background papers, 3 years of work. So each part of this index was actually thoroughly researched in a technical background paper to make the case for it. All of the robustness tests and all of the detailed conceptual arguments are found in these reports, so you're very much advised to go to them, particularly the DCI paper, which for those of you who are more interested in the index itself, they're all out there on the internet. And really scores of expert group meetings, both at the global and regional level. So what is the DCI? Basically, it is 3 things put together in one index using a very simple aggregation method. As I said, we're very much influenced by the Human Development Index approach. So we like to keep things simple. In fact, even simpler than the HDI, because here we're using the arithmetic average. And we found through our robustness that it doesn't really make much of a difference if you, in terms of the overall results, if you have a geometric average or if you have an arithmetic one. But the arithmetic average is good because it allows you to deconstruct the narrative in terms of the contribution. So that's one thing we'll be showing you right now. What is the story here? First challenge that everybody is going to agree on, affecting richer countries, poorer countries, is not just the quantitative achievements on human development and the human development components of income, health, and education, but the quality of these issues. So that we've adjusted the HDI for quality, and that is a challenge. The first challenge that is facing all countries. There's been a lot of progress at the global level, regional level on the HDI, but when you factor in, when you discount the HDI for quality, it's maybe a different narrative, particularly for some countries, including in the Arab countries. The second challenge, and we all agree on, is environmental sustainability. And the third one, which we are very much anchored to in this region in particular, is the governance one. Put them all together, and you have this kind of conceptual framework, which I'd like to spend 1 or 2 minutes on. So, as I mentioned, these 3 challenges can be summarized into 7 dimensions. So you have 3 dimensions related to the quality adjusted human development index, and that's reflected in the health challenge index, which is measured by the healthy life expectancy published by the WHO. Education challenge is basically, again, the HDI's education, mean and expected years of schooling, but discounted by the quality of education using the harmonized test scores that are published by the World Bank. The income challenge is perhaps the most conceptually problematic, because what does it mean to have a good quality income? The best answer that we can provide right now is if it's well distributed. But in a forthcoming report, we're hoping to adjust that so that it becomes income that leads to poverty reduction or poverty eradication. So that's the quality adjusted human development index challenge. And then we go to the environmental sustainability. And that's basically 2 narratives, one on the climate change and energy efficiency, and another one on environmental health. One basically deals with the health of the planet, and one deals with the planet, how it's affecting our health. And that environmental health, by the way, was selected with its component from the Environmental Performance Index precisely because of the link it has with the Healthy Life Index that we've seen in the QHDI. So over here, and I think this is very relevant in the post-COVID world, we're actually implicitly adding to the size or the weight of the environmental health and the health component of this index. And finally, governance. And here we're balancing between two very important pillars of good governance. One, which is government effectiveness, that deals with the ability of government to provide quality public services, infrastructure, etc. And that, as you know, is a very important part of, especially in this region, the narrative that is being promoted for, the role of the state, and as an essential part of it is its ability to provide this, and especially as we can see, a lot of countries are being currently challenged with political instability, economic recession, etc., etc. And democratic governance, which essentially, as we define it, is based on rule of law, institutional accountability, and participation. Why not corruption? Why not human rights indicators? All of these others were tested, but according to our conviction, is basically those three that, and they're reflecting the various aspects of government that are influencing, that exerts the influence on all the other governance indicators that we see. So all of this is there in the conceptual framework that was published again by our contributing authors, and you can refer back to them. But I want to go straight to it because I know that we have a lot to cover. The DCI as an index is basically the flip of the HDI. So the closer you are to one, the highest challenge that you will see is the score of 1. The least challenge, of course, we don't reach that. These are theoretical ends of the spectrum. 0 means that you don't have any challenge at all. Countries that have a score of up to 0.2 are considered to be very low challenge. Countries that are ranging from 0.2 to 0.3 are considered to be very low. 0.2, less than 0.2 is very low challenge. 0.2 to 0.3 is low. 0.3 to 0.45 is medium level challenge, and 0.45 to 0.55 is high challenge category. Anything above 0.55 is a very high challenge category. So we've added another category here. We don't have 4, but we have 5 categories compared to the HDI. Let me then hand it over to Abdulkarim so he can run through the main findings for the report for Arab countries.
Thank you very much, Khalid. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Rana and Olivia, for organizing this webinar. My name is Abdulkarim Jaafar, and I'll be presenting the regional scores on the Development Challenges Index and its components, with a focus mainly on the Arab region. I'll start first here with the bigger picture by looking at the overall Development Challenges Index before moving to the individual component or challenges. As we can see here, the Arab region is the second most challenged region globally, with a DCI score of 0.495, which means that our region is actually within the high development challenges group. And we can also notice that the Arab region and the other highly and very highly challenged regions are actually very far from their other or nearest neighboring regions, which are, as we can see here, Latin America and East Asia. As for the changes over time or the improvements over time, we can see some modest reduction in the challenges, and but the region is still actually facing the challenges that are larger than the global average. And when it comes to the share of each of the 3 challenges to the overall DCI, we can see that governance is the most pressing issue in the region, and this is actually represented by a large and increasing share of the governance challenge to the overall DCI. And in the year 2020, this share was equal to 41% of the index. Now, as we have seen the scores of the regions, it's important since we're talking about development issues, and as Khalid has mentioned, we're anchored to the capability approach, which is actually human-centered. So it's important to look at the distribution of the world population across the 5 challenge categories. So we can notice here that across the years 2000, 2010, and 2020, we had no share or no Arab individuals living in low or very low challenged countries. So the Arab region is the one with this brown color. And if we look precisely at the year 2020, we can see that we have 192 million individuals in the Arab region living in highly challenged countries. And we have another 91 million individuals living in very highly challenged countries, compared to 131 million individuals in medium challenged countries. Overall, this means that we have 70% of the Arab population living in highly and very highly challenged countries, and the remaining 30% is in medium challenged countries. Now I'll move to the three different challenges, and I'll start with the quality adjusted human development challenge. Here we can see that the Arab region has made some good improvement over the past 2 decades, and it has moved from the high challenge category to the medium challenge category, yet we're still scoring above the world average. And when we did the computation and looked at different years, we noticed that the highest reduction actually took place between the years 2000 and 2010, which means that over the past decade and after the Arab Spring and the conflicts that started taking place in the Arab region, these conflicts have actually hampered development and slowed the development progress or the challenges reduction. This shows partly the impact of conflict on development, which will be seen later with Youssef. And for the share of each component or the share of each subcomponent to this quality adjusted human development challenge, we can see that the region is particularly challenged in education, with the share for the quality adjusted education component being nearly 50% of this index in the year 2020, as well as the year 2000. Now, for the second environmental sustainability challenge, we can see that the region here performs better than the world average, or slightly better than the world average on this front, with a good reduction or improvement that has taken place over the past 2 decades. And if we look at the shares of the different subcomponents of this index, we can see that the highest share comes from the environmental health challenge. This is actually also the case across all other developing regions. While when it comes to the richer or developed regions or more developed regions of North America and Europe, we can see that these regions have made some very good improvements and started closing their gaps when it comes to the environmental health, which is, as Khalid has mentioned, more correlated with the healthy life expectancy and hence with the income. But they started now facing high and increasing climate change and energy issues. And if we look at the Arab subgroups, and especially at the high-income Arab countries, we can see that these countries are actually following the path of these other regions. So they started improving on the environmental health front, yet they are deteriorating when it comes to climate change and energy efficiency. So here it's very important to highlight that it is indeed important to improve on different aspects, including the income-related aspects, but not at the cost of the environment and at the cost of the planet. Now, our last challenge is that of good governance. We can see here that unfortunately the region or the Arab region is the most challenged region globally on the governance challenge. And there has not been any significant improvements over the past 2 decades. And the region is still scoring 0.604, which is in the very high challenge category. And again, similarly to the overall BCI, we don't have any Arab country facing low or very low governance challenges. We have 12 countries facing very high challenges, 2 countries facing high challenges, and 5 countries facing medium challenges. And my last point about the contribution of each of the subcomponents, we can see here that in 2020, the higher share of 53% of this governance challenge comes from the government effectiveness. And again, here we can see some of the impact of conflicts on the region, as conflicts have been leading to severe damages on the infrastructure and on the public services. This is everything from my end. I'll stop here and hand over to Maria to go over the country level results. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdulkarim, and thank you, Olivia and Nana, for organizing this webinar. So now I will move on.
But just a quick comment. You can see here that actually on the global level, this component is the only one that has seen rise at the global level. Okay, everything else has been in decline since 2000 to 2020. So it's not just a regional challenge, it's also very much a global one. And I think if we update the numbers to 2023, in light of all that we're seeing around us, we probably see even more deteriorations on this particular component. Go ahead.
So I will be discussing the Arab country level results. So in this first graph, you can see the Arab countries ranked on DCI out of 163 countries for the year 2020. So we can see here that for the very high level of challenge, we have 3 countries, which are Yemen, Syria, and Sudan. And they are all part of the 20 most challenged countries on the DCI worldwide, and they are all conflict-affected countries. And Yemen is the 4th most challenged country globally and is the most challenged among all Arab countries. As for the high challenge category, we here have conflict-affected countries as well as least developed countries, which are Libya, Mauritania, Djibouti, and Iraq. We have 1 middle-income country, which is Egypt, and we have surprisingly 2 GCC countries, which are Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Now, for the medium challenge category, we also have GCC countries along with middle-income countries. And the UAE has the lowest level of challenge among all Arab countries. It ranks 120 out of 163 globally. And it is closely followed by Tunisia and Jordan, which rank 113 and 116 respectively. Now, it is important to highlight here that while on the HDI, we have several Arab countries, notably the GCC countries that have a very high level of achievement. When we go to the DCI, we can see here that all of the Arab countries are clustered among the very high, and medium level of challenges, which means that when we incorporate the quality of human development, governance, and environmental sustainability, it shows that there is still a lot to be done for the Arab countries in order to achieve a high level of development. Moving on to the performance of Arab countries on the DCI compared with that on other indicators, we can see here the rank changes when moving from GNI per capita and from HDI towards the DCI. The most important thing we can notice here is that the majority of Arab countries lose ranks when moving from either of the 2 indices towards the DCI. And many of these countries are among the 20 who deteriorated the most globally. And the most highly impacted countries are oil-rich Arab countries. And it is also important to note that Bahrain is the country that lost the most ranks when moving from either the HDI or income towards DCI. Nevertheless, we also have some countries that did achieve some improvements when we use the DCI. And Morocco, Tunisia, and Jordan figure among the highest 20 improvements globally on this front. And also Tunisia and Jordan are the 2 top improvements when moving from the GNI towards the DCI. Now, if you look at the very highly level challenged Arab countries' performance on the scores from the year 2000 to the year 2020, we can notice here that 2 out of the 3 has an increase in its scores. So in the year 2000, the score for Yemen was 0.583 and it increased to 0.636, and that of Syria increased from 0.565 in the year 2000 to 0.574 in the year 2020. And these 2 countries are among the very few countries which showed an increase in their DCI. This shows that when there's conflict in the country, this really hampers the development of the country. If you look here at the scores of the highly challenged Arab countries, you can see the same story for Libya, where its score increased from 0.523 to 0.539 in the year 2020. It is also important to note here that prior to the war, it had a decline in its DCI score, indicating an improvement in its development challenges. However, since the war started, its level of challenges increased. Now, for other countries, we have Mauritania and Egypt, whose scores remained somewhat stable. For Mauritania, around 0.53, and for Egypt, around 0.5. Now, for other countries such as Djibouti, Iraq, and Bahrain, you can see that they moved from the very high level of challenge to the high challenge level. While that of Saudi Arabia also declined from the upper high to the lower high level of challenges. Finally, if we look at the medium challenge Arab countries' scores, we can see here that the majority of these countries witnessed a decline in their scores, many of which from the high challenge category to the medium challenge. while Lebanon's score remains somewhat stable at around 0.44. This is due to the political instability that's occurring in the country. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Khalid to discuss policy implications.
Thank you, Maria. So these are some of the numbers that we're going to basically discuss when we also go to the regional report that I'll speak to when we end the presentation. But first, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the policy implications of all of this. Clearly, there are two policy messages that stand out at the global or regional level. One is that you need to strengthen this nexus between environmental health systems and healthy life outcomes, even for them. I think that COVID speaks to that, so that's a pretty obvious one. The second one is that unless you build resilient economies and build on the investments that happened in education and harness these opportunities in the labor market, and especially now with all the transitions and we're seeing in the fourth, so-called fourth and fifth industrial revolutions, you're not going to be able to solve some of the fundamental issues that are driving many of these results. And so, but I'm going to come back to that in a second and talk a little bit about the economic resilience in a while. But the third message is that governance in its components, whether it's democratic governance or government effectiveness, need not be trade-offs, as much of the debate is happening in this particular region. You don't have to give up one to achieve the other. That's a key message that we would like to highlight, and I think it comes out. So you don't need to give up on your democratic freedoms and values in order for you to achieve government effectiveness. There are many cases where both can be achieved, and they should be achieved, and they should be complementing. And finally, most importantly, the global level, even at the regional level, you don't want to start a report or with looking at the best achievers. I mean, these countries, the Norways and Finlands, whichever way you measure development, the Nordic countries are going to be at the top. We already know they've had many achievements. Question is, what can be done? And here, I think we need to focus more on the most challenged countries in this region, the Yemen and Syria and many of the Sudan and Mauritania. These countries are really hosting most of the populations that are highly challenged. And of course, many of them also live in middle-income countries. You need to focus our efforts on these countries in order for us to see visible impacts on development challenges. Finally, one of the things that we wanted to highlight, going back to this question that I will anticipate when we face, what is driving this theoretically? What is driving our index? And here, of course, as we mentioned, that we're basing it, of course, on the capability approach. But that's also not going to answer the relationship between governance and human development, for example. What kind of causal inference can we make about the relationship? That's a debate that we deliberately don't want to get into, because we believe that this causality issue will be dependent on each country's situation and even time. And I think here this graph highlights this very important point, that the relationship actually tends to be a little bit fuzzy for countries that have medium and above levels of governance, or medium and above levels of human development on the quality-adjusted human development index. Once you exceed that medium level of governance, once you improve, then the relationship becomes a lot more clear. And I think that's the message, that there's the causality issue is very important. We're not underestimating that. In fact, there's a whole paper, a background paper devoted exactly to that, on the relationship between institutions and governance and human development. And we believe overall, conceptually, that governance is what leads to or causes human development outcomes in a majority of cases and a majority of times. But it need not always be the case for all countries across all time. So that's a key message that I wanted to highlight here. Now, before I hand it over to Youssef, and I think we have like another 12, 13 minutes, I just wanted to very quickly tell you about what we're doing to go beyond this DCI. This isn't just an index. This is part of the ESCWA's effort to really tell a whole narrative on developments and using the DCI and similar indices in order to enable us to help countries with their policy setting. So one of the natural extensions of the DCI would be to take it at the subnational level and look at the inequalities in the DCI itself. So this is work in progress. This is a paper that is about to be published, in which we look at the inequalities in the components of the DCI. So we have the inequalities in human development, inequalities in environment, sustainability, and in governance. These inequalities, without getting into the details, are vertical or horizontal. There are also opportunities and outcomes. And so there are all kinds of inequalities here, but the aim is to look beyond the averages. And when you do that, this is still work in progress, but when you do that, you find it very beautiful. I use this word deliberately because I was surprised to actually see that two indices with dramatically different indicators would have such a high correlation. But as you can see here, the development challenges index correlates non-linear way, but still very strongly with the development inequalities index that we're proposing. And the message here is that if you want to work on improving the DCI, you have to work on inequalities, especially for countries that have medium or inequalities, level of inequalities or below. You can see a very neat relationship. And that's really one of the key messages I think we want to go. But for Arab countries, many of them unfortunately lose ranks when we move again from the DCI to the DII, which means that inequality is a big issue on the policy agenda. Same thing when it comes to operationalizing. Many of these indicators are non-economic in nature, yet the economy and the GDP affects many of them. And so the issue is here to go beyond income and to measure resilience in the economy. That's another piece of work that we're working on. I don't want to get into the details. I'm just giving you ideas and flashes of what's to come. So we're building an economic resilience index that takes into account many aspects of resilience in the real economy and in the financial sector. Some of the aspects are mentioned here: debt to GDP ratios and credit ratings and financial resilience. And then we're also looking at economic complexity and the export concentration of vulnerable employment. And when you do that, you see that many Arab countries lose on the ranks compared to the income per capita. So these are some of the challenges that I think we're all aware of. I mean, there's really nothing dramatically new that comes with these numbers. They emphasize what we already know. But the difference is, and this is a very big difference, is that we now have a very solid analytical framework in order to analyze these trends. Turning over to Youssef, I think we're doing good on time. Youssef, you have around 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, I think if Youssef's the last speaker, so be good to try and...
I just have one concluding slide.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Indeed, I'm the last speaker, so everyone bear with me. I'll be quickly talking about the development conflict nexus, but before going into that, I can't think of a better document than the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to talk about development. And it's not working, sorry. So the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development advocates that there can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development. Sustainable Development Goal 16 is about peace, justice, and strong institutions. It is regarded as an important enabling goal to attain the SDGs. It is interconnected across the whole 2030 development agenda. Clearly, conflict destroys development. It destroys the infrastructure of development, namely people, society, and institutions. Effective enable institutions, and this goes basically with what was said earlier by Abdulkarim and Khalid. Effective enable institutions are considered as the immune system of a society. Good governance embodies the strength, resilience, and capacity of institutions. Governance is a challenge in several Arab states, and this was also highlighted before, but even more so in conflict-affected countries. So on this side, on this slide, we plotted a no conflict scenario for Libya, Palestine, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. The red dotted line represents a no conflict scenario for these 5 countries and how their HDI value would have presently been had they remained on their pre-conflict development path, with HDI growing at the same annual rate as in the period between 2010. And obviously, the impact of conflict on human development is clearly before you. Also, and this is frequently forgotten, conflict-induced shocks tend to linger for several years and even generations. And here, just quickly, I'd like to highlight the fact that 28 million people are considered either refugees or IDPs in the Arab region, while close to 65 million people need some form of humanitarian assistance. Now, it is significant to point out that forced displacement and humanitarian aid dependency remain at alarming levels and have continued to rise even with the reduction of violence, which peaked in 2014. So basically, the legacy of conflict stays on for years, if not decades. So these massive vulnerabilities of populations affected by conflict are not expected to relent, especially when considering the impact of the future risk of violence or other mega trends such as climate change. And here, this is basically from our risk forecasting model, risk of violence forecasting model. And this map looks at the risk of future state-based deadly violence, and at the grid of 55, each grid represents 55 square kilometers. And here you're looking at the forecast for September 2023, and you can see obviously there's a number of flashpoints according to this risk forecast. Quickly on megatrends. So that we're clear, there are several megatrends obviously at play globally. And as you all know, megatrends are very difficult to influence or reverse in the near term. Some of these megatrends are obviously demographics, connectivity, and urbanization. Now, climate change is of particular relevance to the Arab region, as we have all seen in the previous slides. Climate change will lead to extreme weather events and disasters becoming more intense and common. Within the last 10 years alone, 170 disasters have been recorded in the region, with over 45 million people affected. The Arab region is already facing significant water stress, with 14 of the world's most water-stressed countries located in the region, as can be seen in the ranking of water-stressed countries in the middle of the slide. Conflict-affected populations will become even more vulnerable as they confront the challenges brought on by both climate change and conflict. Now, this map captures the association of the risk of violence with drought and vulnerability. Drought and vulnerability includes data on the intensity of droughts and their impact on crops, harvests, and yield, communities, vulnerability to climate-related impacts, agricultural dependency, and adaptive capacity in agriculture. And here again, you can see the flashpoints where the probability of risk of state-based violence could occur for September 2023. So the impacts of drought, or rather climate change, could adversely affect conflict risk through a variety of channels, including the loss of livelihoods, competition for resources, food insecurity, migration, and overall macroeconomic contraction. In conclusion, conflict-affected populations are particularly vulnerable given their resilience as well as social and institutional capacities, which have been eroded by war. At the same time, future risk of conflict and the current legacies of conflicts, such as humanitarian aid dependency, will further deepen these vulnerabilities and hazards associated with future shocks and megatrends. So this, in a nutshell, is basically a very brief depiction of the conflict development. Some of this obviously was already touched upon in the previous slides of the BCI. Over to you.
Thank you. And just in closing, on our future agenda, but before, just to continue on what Youssef was discussing, there is also a background paper devoted to measuring conflict, which Youssef and I co-authored with Manuela Nama online as one of the 10 background papers. So that's also for those of you who are interested more into the analytics of how to measure conflict, which is no trivial matter. They can refer back to this paper. In a nutshell, our future agenda. Yes, we want to contribute to the global debate, and we hope that this is a contribution to this ongoing debate on the thinking beyond GDP. It is not a trivial task, as one can imagine, but we think that we have 2 cents to share on this issue. And it will be continue with a few indices, and not just the indices, but the ramifications of the narrative on development. And that's really what is of essence here. Our next step is to take all of this work and then go back and contextualize it in the Arab region, as this presentation is the first step of that. So if we were to tell the story of Arab development, but armed with these indices and new frameworks, what would that be? Very much of it you already know, but when you do it based on this empirical, rigorous empirical evidence, then it really does help you a lot, especially when you want to frame the order of magnitude of challenges or what to do next. And then why not take it at the national level? That's also, we've been approached by some countries who are really quite interested in doing all of this even more so at the national level and linking this work to their planning processes. So final slide, you can visit our website, of course, you can download the report, it's all online, and you can also visit the ESCWA index simulator, which allows you to look at the impact of a change in any country's performance and any indicator and how it affects the overall ranking and the score of the DCI. So the link is mentioned there. And I think with that, we still have 16 minutes to go. Rana, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That lots of really fruitful thoughts there for us to consider. And yeah, thank you for sharing and speaking as well, Khalid. So yeah, I was busy writing a comment and a question for you, but let's hear first from everyone attending the call. So you can send a text in the chat or direct your question in person. Yeah, so feel free to intervene, put your hand up, or just interrupt us. Okay, so questions now. So I'm just going to look at the chat. Yeah, a question about a copy of the presentation. So I think normally we share a recording and the slides after the webinar. Is that right, Olivia? Yeah. So presentation slides can be shared afterwards.
Yes, if the speakers are happy with that.
Of course, yeah. So subject to speakers being happy. Yeah,
I think we can share with you the presentation, but just allow us to share it with you. Maybe there are a couple of things that I noticed would need modification, just a couple of typos while I was presenting, but I'll share with you the modified version for you to share. No problem.
Yeah, there'll be a short time to edit the recording as well to make sure that it's all correct, and that if anybody who wanted to not be displayed in the recording was kind of blocked out of that as well, we can all share the documents at the same time, so there's time to edit. Thanks.
That's great, thank you. So we have another question in the chat from Amal. Thanks, Amal. So do country DCIs presented take into consideration geographical, ethnic and gender disparities within a country?
Good question. Should we wait for all the questions, Rana, and then just take them all at once?
Good point. Yeah, I think in the past we've taken them question by question. It's entirely up to you. Would you like to take a few questions at a time?
On this one very quickly, that's why we're doing the development inequalities index, because when you deal with an average for the country, obviously you don't take into account gender disparities or ethnic disparities or horizontal disparities or vertical, rich and poor, for example, or men and women. In the DII, we're doing that. So we have two narratives. One, which is the DCI, okay, which is at the country average level, and then we're producing a development inequalities index, which is factoring in the gender disparities and, of course, horizontal between groups and rich and poor, outcomes and opportunities. So yes, this is very much behind our thinking on our future research and even current research.
That's great. Thank you. Rasha, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, hello, thank you. Let me first lower my hand. I have a question for the panelists. In the same vein that we are thinking of beyond the GDP, as an economist, my name is Dr. Rasha Stetia, economist at the Hashemite University in Jordan. I'm an economic development, my main specialty. And I was thinking always, what are the alternatives for the measurements that are used in the education index? They are the same as in the HDI. So why we can't go beyond those mean years of schooling, etc.? You know, that you mentioned in your PowerPoint slide, the indices you have took in the education. So why we don't think of other things to measure education?
Okay, that's a very difficult yet easy to respond to question. It's difficult because if I were to think of what is a proper education, good quality education, it would lead to all kinds of other questions. So one would be, should this be at international standards or should it be at national standards? And then second of all, even if we're, I mean, to give you a very simple example, if you were to study in Mauritania, traditional systems of education, you wouldn't even need to go to a formal school. Or Somalia, they would go to the traditional Quranic school, but they would learn a lot of skills and they would learn how to read and write, etc. Are they getting an education? Yes, they are getting an education. But in our system of evaluation, they're not enrolled in school and therefore they have 0 years of schooling. So again, there are so many complexities with what is a good quality education. What we wanted to do is to follow on what the Human Development Index provides, which is information for as many countries as possible on the mean years of schooling. But what our additional value added here was to discount that by the measure of quality of education. Now, the TIMS, one can argue, or the quality adjusted variable that we use, which is international test scores, not just the TIMS, but other similar scores. They offer a measure of that, okay? Is it a perfect measure? Absolutely not. We know the problems with it, but it's the best measure that we have for over 160 countries. And that's the problem, Dr. Rasha, is that if you wanted to do this, and you wanted to do it for 160 countries, and you want to answer the question, you have very limited number of variables available. The best one that we can think of is to discount your average years of schooling using this measure of quality education. When you do that, the Arab region ends up losing significantly more than others. And that's the message I think that we do. But beyond that, you're absolutely right. If we want to use this for national policy making, we might need to think even beyond all of this framework. And I agree with you. And that applies, by the way, to many other indicators as well. So what we do here for global and regional comparisons has to be put in that very important criteria that we're doing global and international comparisons, which can be helpful for informing national policy making, but not for setting national policy making. Rana, back to you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, maybe a conversation to continue outside of the network's space as well. So thank you, Rasha. Over to Mahmoud. You've got your hand up, please.
He's muted.
Mahmoud,
Yes.
you're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. This is Mahmoud Asbihat from We Participate for Civil Society Development Center in Jordan, Zerga. I'm just asking about the democratic governance regarding the CSO participation. How did we measure that? The CSOs and CBOs participation or participatory environment at the consultation. How did we measure that in this report.
Very good. You want to get into this?
Sure. Thank you, Mahmoud. So for these indicators and for the democratic governance indicators in general, the best available option was to look at the expert surveys and the subjective data or the expert opinion data. So in this indicator in particular, we're using the varieties of democracy data set, which actually asks some questions to some governance experts. These questions, or national government experts. These questions include, for example, in this particular indicator, the extent to which, for example, CSOs are involved in all the policies that are implemented or in the discussions preceding the policy making or implementation. And these scores are from on a scale from 0 to 4, and then they are rescaled just to have some continuous values.
Precisely. So there are many governance indicators out there, Mahmoud, but we went with the varieties of democracies for a very simple reason. They are very transparent on what they do. It's not a black box. So they give you exactly the questions that were asked. They give you exactly how they did the assessment. So it's not, it's an open, kind of box when it comes to knowing how their index was calculated. And we used that for that particular reason. Okay, so I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm just going to read out the questions posted in the chat. So I think there's a question that Amal has asked. So I've posted my questions to Olivia. So by mistake, I'm trying to send them to everyone, but I think there's a question that I very much share with Amal in the chat, which is about the weightings of the 3 subcomponents of the index. And I know I was curious about this as well. So the sustainability, quality, human development, and the governance. Could you tell us some more about the different weightings of these? And I mean, presumably they would vary across different countries as well, and the context of them would be different. Could you explain some more?
That's a fundamental question, which is again very easy to answer. I think when we were launching the report last week from SOAS, Professor Sabina Alkir from Oxford, she also focused in her intervention on this point. We don't propose to do indices based on statistical exercises. From our point of view, the indices should reflect our normative positions and our conceptual positions. And basically what we're saying by giving equal weight to these dimensions is that they're equally important. We cannot say that sustainability is more important than governance or human development outcomes are more important than sustainability. We can say that these are fundamental challenges facing all countries, maybe at different degrees. But in order to maintain comparability, Rana, you know this, you need to maintain the same system of weights for all countries. Otherwise, you will not be comparing oranges and apples. And what we are saying here is that all of these indicators, we're using a nested weight approach. So all of the indicators that go under the challenge and all of the challenges have the same weight, with the exception of the environmental performance index, environmental health component. Here, we use the same weights that were dictated to us by the EPI. Why? Because it's in those same structure of weights that they are ascribing the relationship to healthy life expectancy. So they're saying that air pollution contributes this much to healthy life expectancy. Access to water contributes this much. Access to sanitation contributes this much. And since it's our conceptual framework that we're measuring healthy life and the factors that influence it, we kept that same structure of weights for that purpose. Again, for normative consideration. But, this is a very big but, we also did our homework on the statistical robustness exercise. So if you go to the DCI paper, you'll see, and I think Sabina mentioned that this is actually one of the few indices where you can exactly replicate the results because we were very clear on step by step how do you reach the DCI. So if you want to replicate the results, everything is very clear in terms of how do we set the minimum, how do we set the maximum, and also the 250 plus robustness tests that we did. In order, and some of these robustness tests were precisely to see whether this nested weighting scheme was appropriate for the index results. In other words, whether country results would change dramatically as a result of other, if we were to adopt another weighting scheme. And as it turned out, our proposed weighting scheme was one of the top 5% that the models, the statistical robustness models would produce. And it's all there, again, in the background. So thank you. This is a very important question.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, very valuable. Thank you so much, Khalid. I mean, I kind of had a follow-up question or clarification, but just want to check if colleagues wanted to add any more comments or questions from the audience, please. Time warning, so we need to leave soon. Well, I mean, I think this is it could be just a question or a clarification for another time, and it could be just my reading or understanding of the ranking, but I think it caught my attention, and I've put this in the chat, that when you were ranking the different world regions and you've got the world average in the middle, I think, Khalid, it was fairly sort of towards the beginning of your presentation. I was just trying to work out the percentage measures for some of the components of the index and where the countries were ranked. And it was interesting to see that, from what I could understand, that some countries seem to have similar percentages in terms of the challenges they were facing, but they were ranked at different points in terms of high or low sort of challenges. So again, could be something for another occasion. I don't know if you have a quick and final answer just to conclude.
Just very quickly on this, you can have countries that are very low level challenge, but the distribution of the contribution of each challenge is very different than a country with a very high level challenge. So we need to look at both the level and the contributions of each, the percentages, in order for us to tell the story. You're absolutely right. That's one of the reasons why we deliberately put it this way.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. We're finishing on time and wishing everyone all the best and all the best colleagues at ESCWA with your effort. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you hopefully next month. I think
thank you, Rana. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet you all.